Hello, I'm Michelle and welcome to Ripping Yarns, my monthly podcast sharing my stories of handmade classic knitwear. This is not just another knitting channel but a journey of discovery covering all my knitting projects, thoughts on patterns and stitchcraft, tips and tricks, and of course showcasing my finished knitwear. If you're new to my channel then please don't forget to like and subscribe. So hit that bell and let's dive in. So today I started a new project. As you can see, it's a Paton's Waverley DK Shetland Paton Nostalgia collection. Now I've had this for quite some time and as you can see it's stripy. So because it's DK weight, I've had in my mind for quite some time now that I want to knit something with navy and rust. So I had DK weight rust. So it was obvious as it's DK weight I couldn't work with a 4-ply pattern. So I decided I needed to find one that has double knit. So this one is perfect because it is a double knit pattern. Now the only thing is I don't have navy double knit cotton. So I decided, I don't know if it's a good idea or not, to use some 4-ply and just knit it double, but I've actually done a tension swatch and it does work out to the pattern, so that's what I'm going to do. So looking at this pattern, as you can see this collection has got quite a few really attractive designs. I've only just sort of discovered it. I'm really interested in actually number 3394, which looks like another cotton Norwegian style jumper. So I might knit that at some point if I can find the pattern that is, so I'll be looking on eBay soon. So yeah, this is a really attractive little cardigan that it has got a sort of vintage influence as you can see by the model. So it's interesting in that it's got 2 colour stripe, but because I just want to use 2 colours then I'm probably going to just use main navy and rust for each stripe because obviously, you know, this is my own take on the design. So as the design has a sort of semi baggy fit, I want something a bit tighter. Obviously I don't want it to gape at the front, so I'm going for the size below mine, and as I'm knitting it in a cotton tends to stretch anyway, so I'm definitely going to use cotton and go for the size down. Another adjustment to this pattern, I like a deep rib, so I'm definitely going to make the rib deeper. And maybe the collar, I might actually do a little trim in the collar, maybe sort of a contrast around the edge. We'll see, but I'm definitely going to play around with this and give it my own take. So I'm looking forward to this, especially that it's a cotton yarn, so it's perfect for knitting this time of year. So I'll probably show you how I'm progressing in the next podcast. So I look forward to starting this, which I have. I've already started the back. As I said, I'm knitting it double. So yeah, so I think it's going to knit up fairly quickly. So hopefully by the next podcast I will have done quite a bit on this. So next I want to talk about what I'm wearing today. So this is a really pretty, attractive jumper that I knitted a couple of years ago, I think, or maybe a year ago. You'll see all reference to it on one of my old podcasts if you look back at my old set of podcasts. Just recently, I actually found the original pattern someone was selling on eBay, and I quickly snapped it up. Even though I knitted it from a photocopy, I always like the original pattern. and as you can see, it's a My Weekly insert. I don't know if these were inserted into magazines, but they're some really attractive designs. And as you can see by looking at the original pattern, I did actually contrast the collar and the little ruffle down the front, but that was purely because I didn't know that I was going to have enough yarn to finish the project. I probably would have, but that meant if I did use all that yarn, I wouldn't have had any other yarn to use for one of the accessories. So as I didn't think I had enough yarn, I did actually have lots of yarn left over. So I've decided I was going to knit a Phyllis Calvert's turban scarf. This is a Best Way design. It's really attractive actually, and it's quite versatile. So yeah, so I decided to knit that, and that came out quite well. I haven't really worn it, but I will do at some point when I wear the jumper. But I love this jumper. I don't know if you can see the proper colours on this camera, but it is like a jade green and like a mint. So that was that. I also had enough to knit a snood to go with it in this lovely mint vintage yarn, and also I decided that I was going to knit a little beret to match, because I still had some of this jade, so I knitted a beret as well. So it did actually go quite far in the end, so it's quite funny, but I managed to knit the jumper and 2 bits of headwear, well actually 3 bits of headwear with beret, so it worked out quite well in the end. So it did go a long way, that vintage yarn. So getting back to the beret, I used my beret pattern in Sarah Dallas Vintage Knits. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's a really lovely book. I've knitted a couple of designs from this, including the little sweater, the little wavy sweater that's on the same page as the beret. So yeah, so it's quite an easy pattern. I use circular needles and I managed to get the tension right, but I don't know, maybe it's because these berets always seem to come up big on my head. I think I've got a really small head and that's why. So I'm hoping it might shrink in the wash, which is a bit unusual because normally things shrink in the wash and you want to make them bigger. But in this respect, I think it just does feel a bit too big for me. But it's a beautiful pattern, so I might knit a few more and maybe I'll knit them smaller. So here you go. So I hope you like that. And yeah, any questions after the show, then please let me know. I'm happy to answer all your questions and inquiries. So that's it. So that's the little number I'm wearing and the accessories that go with it. Next I want to talk about my design on the mannequin. Yes, it's finally finished. My 1936 Stitchcraft smock sweater. So I don't know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, wow, that's a bit loud. Well, yes, maybe it is. Maybe the colours weren't quite to the 1936 colourways, but basically I bought the buttons and a buckle and I didn't know what to knit up with those. I wanted to use them for a project. I didn't know which one to use. So I just came across the, as you know, I mentioned it in my previous episode, the Stitching Time Susan Crawford book, and it's called This Attractive Affair. So I used this, and funnily enough, I know Susan's interpreted it to the, all different sizes, but there was actually the opportunity to knit from the original. Well, I started knitting from the original, but then I got lost somehow, and I thought I didn't understand the instructions. So then I decided, well, maybe I use what Susan had actually created, and then I just followed that from there on. So sometimes, you know, the original patterns aren't always very instructive, so it was really helpful to follow those instructions instead. So anyway, I want to talk about the construction. So the original pattern, I started to follow it, and when I was knitting, because obviously you had all like 12 separate pieces, the front and back are identical, but you knit the front and back first. So when I started to knit one of those pieces, I realised that it was going to be far too long, and as you knit it vertically, I had to then undo to the length I wanted, and I kind of stuck with it, and I thought, yes, it's enough to sort of go just slightly below the waist. And as I wanted to create a belt to go with it, I decided that I would stick to that length. So that was why I chose to make it shorter. I don't know whether it was the yarn tension which made it come up longer, but anyhow, sometimes you just have to adjust to accommodate whatever yarn you're using. I forgot to mention the yarn that I used for this project. I already had the yarn in my stash. The actual main colours I used were, it's like a coral pink. So it's pink, it might look orange on the mannequin, but it's definitely coral. It's like a peachy colour, and I used the Paton's Diploma Gold 4-ply. It does have wool content, but it actually has 55% wool, 25% acrylic and 20% nylon. So that means it probably wouldn't shrink in the wash. The contrast red colour is a Debbie Ann, I think this is a vintage yarn, super all wool 4-ply, so that would be shrinkable, but I think because it's a contrast, I don't think it's going to make the project shrink. So yeah, so an interesting colour combination, probably not true to the 1930s, but maybe it's my modern take on this design. I welcome your thoughts, critical or non-critical. Before I forget, I want to tell you about the belt. So I wanted to use something sturdy, so I knitted a great big long length for the belt in the width that I wanted. Originally I was going to use buckram, so I bought some buckram. It was quite wide and I was going to cut it in half, but then I thought if I use buckram it's not going to have much give, and so it's not going to be practical. So then I had the notion, why not buy some elastic? So I thought if I can get some wide elastic, then maybe I can use that instead, and it'd be far more comfortable as long as I cut it to the length that is sort of not too tight, so you know, and also not too tight, not too loose. So what I did was, before I cut it, I wrapped it around the garment so it could look, you know, around myself and also around the garment on the mannequin, so I could decide what length to do it. So I cut it, and then I I tacked all the fabric around it, tucked in the edges. Because the belt had a metal bracket at the back, it wouldn't actually slide through. It was quite thick, the fabric and the elastic, so I had to just sew in the front of it with a matching thread, and it actually worked out okay. So I don't know what you think, but the original pattern didn't have a belt, but I wanted to add a belt because it just looked too smocky, and I don't really wear smocky. I like things that are a bit fitted. So I don't know what you think about that, but I think the belt is quite fab, and it's a beautiful set with the buttons and the buckle. It kind of sets it off. So you might have noticed I've had a head change. Basically, because the beret is far too big for me, I've taken it off. but it's a good opportunity to show you the intricate details on the top of the beret. I did add a little button because I always think it sort of just neatens off the centre at the top, and yeah, it's a beautiful beret that I just need to shrink in the wash, so wish me luck with that. Yeah, this is a lovely little snood that I knitted with some yarn I had left over, and the hair flowers are from the high street. I bought a few years ago, and they are a perfect match with this jumper actually, and it wasn't intended, it just, sometimes it just works out that way. So yeah, so that's all I'm going to talk about with this jumper. If you've got any questions after the podcast, please put some notes and leave some comments. All your comments are appreciated. So the next finished project I want to share with you is the little lace jumper. If you remember in the last podcast, I shared with you this Knitted Garments for All book that I bought a few years ago, and it's page 48, the lace stitch jersey. I did struggle with this one, but I managed to see it through to the very end, and I'm glad that I did. It's a very pretty, intricate lace design, and I now want to share with you my finished approach to the design. So here we are. It's really attractive. I managed to finish it off with some really lovely cute buttons that I had in my stash, so I was quite fortunate to have some that matched, and I just thought the hint of white in the middle of the buttons would complement it perfectly. I also put a little hook and eye in the top because that's what the pattern asked for. So it's really pretty, the collar's really nice. It looks a bit crocheted actually, the collar, but it's not. It's amazing what you can do when you knit, because some knitting projects do look like a bit of crochet, but they're not. But yeah, it's a really pretty design. I'm quite pleased with it. I don't think it's going to be too big. I've actually put it on and it just looks really lovely. So yeah, so I'm really pleased with this one, and I will be wearing it very soon to the office. So next I want to talk about another work in progress. I started this a few weeks ago. I've kind of put it down, but I will pick it up at some point because it's quite a slow growing project. It's another project from the Knitted Garments for All. While I was browsing, I found this pattern, and it's really intricate. For me, it's a bit like tapestry. It's a two-colour project. It's like a floral, I would say, but it's a beautiful design. It's quite close fitting, so it's sort of right up my street because I love close fitting garments. And it's knitted on number 10 and number 12 needles. The main size needle I use is number 10, and when you get to the waist shaping you have to reduce the size to number 12, which gives you that shaping around the waist. So I decided that I was going to knit with two colours, a dark green and a mint green. I've got some double knit yarn in the same similar colours, but I know that double knit would be too big. So luckily I had two cones in these two magnificent colours, so I decided to go with it. It's a beautiful colour. I've already knitted the back. I think this is the front actually. Yeah, this is the front. It's quite stretchy. I don't know if you can see it, but it's really quite stretchy, so I don't think I'm going to have a problem after blocking. I think it will fit me. I just hope it doesn't shrink in the wash, but we will see. So yeah, so I'm kind of making good progress. I've knitted the front, and a little while ago I realised that I'd started to drop stitches, so I quickly rescued my stitches, and I've just about got to the armhole shaping on the back. So I've kind of put it down because I got a bit bored with the slow progress, and it takes me probably a half an hour just to knit 2 rows, and I want something quick at the moment, so I've kind of put it down, but I will pick it up again. Now, as you know, with some of the vintage patterns, you do not get a graph. So with this pattern, there was no graph, it just literally told you what colours to use, and I can't work like that. So like with all my projects that are Faro, I decided to put it on a graph paper. So don't know if you can see, but I find it visually easier to follow on graph rather than just reading, you know, numbers on every stitch. So yeah, so what I do is it's an 18, is it 18 across by 20, 18, yeah, 18, it's an 18 row pattern. So I find it easy just to put the 18 rows on there, and I kind of number every row. And with this, because I'd run out of paper to put each row, I did another little add-on, which is kind of, I just sellotaped it on, so when I sort of get past the number of stitches, I don't know if you can see, but it goes up to about 200 rows. So yeah, so it's quite handy to have this little visual thing that I can work to. So hopefully I will progress with this. It'll probably take me a few months, but I will finish this in time to wear for next autumn. So yeah, so wish me luck on that one. Just as a footnote, I was looking through my stash and I've actually found a very similar pattern to that one in the book. It does look similar, but it is slightly different. So I don't know, for all those vintage knitters out there, it's a P&B pattern number 240, and it is a very similar design, but actually it fits 38-inch bust. So if you're a slightly bigger lady than me, you might want to look out for this. I could attempt to knit this one, but probably not after knitting that one, because I would have to mess about with gauge because the pattern is for a larger size. But I thought I'd mention this because it's a very similar pattern. My most recent work in progress is a Paton Nostalgia collection design. Now I've had this quite a few years. I think I picked it up from a charity shop a few years ago, and I was just looking through my collection, and as you know, I do love stripes, and I just fancied knitting something in cotton. So I've got a few cotton yarns in my stash, and one of the colours that I've really been itching to put together are navy and rust. The problem I have is this is a DK weight pattern, but I only had DK weight cotton in the rust, and I'm not in the navy. My navy was 4-ply, and because I didn't really want to order any more yarns at the time, I decided, well, what I would do is improvise. I did a yarn swatch and I worked out the tension, and the tension was fine. So what I did was I had plenty of 4-ply dark navy, so I just literally wound 2 separate balls up and then put them together, and like this. Oops, don't want to lose my stitches again. I lost some stitches earlier on one of my projects. So yeah, so I've got 2 strands that I put together, and yeah, as long as you pick up the 2 strands when you're knitting, you don't have any problem. But yeah, it's working out fine. And also, I didn't want, this is a 3 colour pattern, but I didn't want to use 3 colours, I just wanted to use 2. So there's also a bit of texture where you've got 2 rows that are like sort of pearly bumps. So what I did, I lost one of those extra colour stripes and stuck with the 2 colours. So just to let you know, the cotton 4-ply yarn I used was just the Patons, and I think the rust might be Patons, or it might be, I think it's a Serdar cotton. But yeah, I mean the 2 colours, I love these 2 colours together, just slightly different. So I've made good progress actually. It's only taken me a week, believe it or not, and I've already knitted the back. Here's the back. So yeah, so it's working out really well. I think it will fit me. So that's the back. And then I've already knitted with the little pocket tops. They're not real pockets, but I think they look really good. So I've knitted those 2 already. So we're making good progress. And today I started knitting one of the sleeves. So doing really well. Anyway, getting back to this pattern, it's a Paton Nostalgia collection number 3399. It's part of a series actually. I think these were produced in the 80s. But if you look, it's got a whole selection of beautiful designs in this collection. Strangely enough, if you look for even copies of this, I've looked high and low, and someone recently was selling this one and this one. I think this one's the only one available on eBay at the moment. Someone's already purchased this one. But I'm really after this one here, which is a beautiful design. I wonder, there might be an original design that this is copied from back in the 40s or 50s, but I haven't found it yet. So it's a beautiful design. That's one that I'm searching high and low for, so hopefully I might find it one day, even if it takes me 10 years. But yeah, it's a beautiful design. There's a bigger picture here. The model looks a bit like Marilyn Monroe. It's a really pretty, I don't know if you can see clearly without any light shining on this, but it's a beautiful design. I am going to knit another one of these, and I'm actually going to use 3 colours. So watch this space, because soon after finishing this one I'm going to knit another one, because you can never have too many cotton cardigans over the summer months. One thing I like to do is accessorise when I knit my cardigans and jumpers. Cardigans especially really look nice. If they're plain in colour, they're really nice accessorised with a pretty scarf. So I do actually have a huge collection, which I think is quite huge. It's a whole box full of vintage scarves, different sizes, and some neck scarves, some long scarves, some that I can wear in my hair up. But this in particular, this pretty design, I dug this out from my box, and I think this would probably look quite nice around my neck with this cardigan. It's a Jack Ma of London scarf. I think it's polyester, but it's a really pretty diamond print design, and it does capture like a dark blue and rust in it. So I thought that would be a really good match for the cardigan. Another thing with buying vintage scarves, or any scarves, is some of the colourings in scarves can actually give you inspiration. If you're not sure what colours to knit with. If you look at some of the vintage scarves, I mean, you don't actually have to own them, you could just look online and look at the colourings in scarves, and that can really give you a good idea of what colours go together. I know they give me inspiration, but you might want to consider that too. So it's not expensive and it doesn't cost you anything to just look online and do a bit of research on colour matching, and it's a really good start if you want to, if you don't know what colours to knit with. Another another scarf that I've got. It's a really silk, pretty scarf. It's got a bit of paisley on it, and that captures a bit of rust on it. I think I've probably got a few more scarves, but I just thought I'd show you a couple of scarves in my collection that I take inspiration from. And also it's just nice to accessorise cardigans and jumpers, especially if you're into vintage. People that love vintage do love accessorising. Same with me today. I'm wearing sort of matching earrings, which are quite pretty. I don't know what name they are. They've got a name on them. I can't read it. I'll have to get a magnifying glass. But they're really lovely, pretty earrings. And yeah, I do have different coloured earrings to match all my outfits. So sometimes I've got so much that I forget what I've got. So yeah, so I wear these quite a lot. I've got an old Ferrero Rocher chocolate box, which is really handy for putting all my earrings in, the ones that I use quite regularly. So good tip. If anyone gives you a present of Ferrero Rocher, you might not like the chocolates, but the box is really useful for storing earrings in. So I think that's it at the moment. So I hope you enjoyed that little snippet. So my last work in progress that I want to share with you on this podcast is another version of the Greenix Sweater. You may remember in the last podcast I mentioned and showed you the Norwegian Greenix Sweater, my version in brown with green and cream. Well, I had some more yarn similar to the brown that I bought from a charity shop for quite cheap amount of money. So I decided that I was going to use two other colours to go with that. So I decided on a lovely blue mohair, which I picked up from a charity shop locally. It was about 50p a ball. So that works perfectly with this colour. I don't know what colour you'd call this, but it's really a neutral colour and it goes really well with pink. The pink is Aran weight actually, which you would think, well, that's a bit strange using Aran weight yarn with DK yarn, but it seems to be working out okay, so I'm just working with it. So I've already knitted the back, so I don't know if you can see that clearly, but yeah, so it's quite stretchy, so it should be fine. And remember, it's like a raglan, so the sleeves form part of the front anyway. So that's the back, and I've also knitted the front. So I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, there's loads of strands because I haven't woven in my ends yet. So I've kind of put this down and I don't know when I'm going to pick it up again because I kind of got bored and I've moved on and now I'm more interested in knitting the cardigan than I am anything woolen because we're entering springtime now. So it means that it's getting a bit warmer. So I want to have sort of cooler projects to work with. So I think that about wraps it up for this time around. So I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. So some of you are probably wondering how I got into vintage knitting. Well, it was probably about 40 years ago. It sounds an awful long time, the 1980s. Well, back in them days, I was into rockabilly. So I used to go to a lot of rockabilly clubs in London with my friends. And obviously, you know, it was dressing up in period clothing. And I used to buy vintage clothes, but a lot of the time, the vintage knitwear wasn't available. Most of the time, the vintage knitwear that I would come across in places like Kensington Market were mohair and sort of more for punks and goths. So it was very limited. I did buy some really nice beaded cardigans from some of the vintage shops, which was quite popular for people that were into the 50s. Like you'd normally wear a pair of faded jeans, sort of baggy jeans, and a beautiful blouse with a beaded cardigan. But that was about it really. So basically I started knitting very basic items. I think the first thing I ever knitted was a little bolero cardigan, because at the time I used to wear blouses, which we had a dressmaker that used to make our blouses, myself and my sister, and I used to wear pedal pushers. Like, we had some fabrics that we'd buy, like tartan was my thing, so I used to have tartan pedal pushers with little bolero cardigan with a blouse. And so I knitted quite a few of those, and they were quite chunky. I think it wasn't really sort of 4-ply yarn at the time, it was probably double knit or chunky, but that was how I really got into the vintage knitting. And then I think probably about 10 years later I used to work with somebody whose mother had an old 40s book similar to this one. Actually, I think it was this one. So she did let me photocopy one of the designs in it, and I did knit a couple of designs actually from this book. So this is one of my go-to books really, because there's really nice patterns in it if you're really into the 40s. So grab yourself a copy. There's quite a few that are on eBay and they're not expensive. It depends obviously on the quality and the condition of the book, but it's a really good book and it's got lots of really helpful tips for vintage knitting. So I would recommend this book definitely, because I've been picking it up, you know, on and off for the last few decades. So yeah, so that's how I started knitting. There was a time where I stopped knitting. I think I probably exhausted knitting the bolero cardigans and a few other sort of 40s designs. I kind of sort of left it a bit, and then it wasn't until I got married in the early 2000s that I actually started knitting more 40s patterns. It was hard to get patterns at the time because we didn't have the likes of eBay and Etsy. So the only places that you could actually accumulate patterns was in charity shops, or if you went to vintage markets, places like Camden, Chelsea, places like that. So it was very limited, or you could pick up some vintage inspired knitwear, which I did. I will show it on another episode, but I started knitting again vintage inspired patterns from a Rowan book that I bought. Like I said, I will show that on another episode, but it's a really nice book and it's got some really lovely patterns in it, and I've actually knitted a few patterns from the book, so I will share that with you at some point. So yeah, so basically that's how I got into vintage knitting. Well, that's about all for this episode. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please like and subscribe to my channel. And do leave comments and suggestions about what you would like to see in future episodes. Until next time, bye!